Hey guys, factoring trinomials part 2. The big difference you're going to see in this video versus the last couple videos, you're now going to have numbers in front of the x squared. So previously we would see just x squared plus 6x plus 8, something like that. Now we may see 2x squared plus 6x plus 8. So we're going to start to kind of build on our knowledge of factoring. I do want to reiterate the sign chart from the last video. If you didn't watch the last video, I would recommend going back and doing that. I would also, if you haven't gotten this copy down, pause the video right now, copy this thing down because I'm going to be referencing it throughout the entire video. Alright, so let's pick up with example 1. So example 1 says factor the trinomial x squared minus 4x minus 21. Well, you'll notice that this one doesn't actually have anything in front of it, so I don't really have to do anything special. These are the easiest cases to factor, or one of the easiest. So I don't have to do any special type of factoring, if you will. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to that and add to that. So I've got x and x. The sign chart up above that you hopefully copied down had negative. If c was negative, then you're going to have one positive, one negative number. So I already took the time to list off my factors of 21 just for sake of time. Now, because my signs are opposite, I am subtracting to 4, subtracting to 4, and multiplying to negative 21. So the only two of these numbers that will get me would be 3 and 7. Now I have to figure out which one's going to go where. So I know I'm going to have 3 and 7, but we wrote down a note under that sign chart that if you have opposite signs, the bigger factor, which is 7 in this case, will always match the same sign as b. So 7 is going to match this negative right there. So I'm going to have negative 7, positive 3. Now again, it doesn't matter the order you write those in. You can write x minus 7x plus 3, but it does matter which one is positive and which one's negative. If you remember from chapter 5, we can FOIL these to check, so don't forget that you can do that. Do first, outer, inner, last. Multiply those to make sure that is actually correct. I'm not going to take the time in the video, but just wanted to mention you can check them to FOIL to check them. So there is my answer. All right, example 2. Directions say to completely factor the trinomial. 4x squared plus 19x plus 21. Check for GCF. 4, 19, and 21 don't have anything in common, so we don't have to worry about that. But notice now it's different. I have a number in front of the x squared. This is where factoring is going to take on a slightly different approach. The method that I use is the rainbow method. It's the same one that the tutoring center suggests, so I think it makes it easier if I'm consistent with them. Rainbow method just says that you multiply a times c. So 4 times 21 is going to give me 84. And then I went ahead and listed off the factors of 84 just to save time. However, on your homework, you'd have to do those either in your head or in the calculator, whichever, depending on the number size. So there are all my factors. So I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to 84 but add to 19. Okay, so I'm looking through this whole list. I'm looking for two. Well, here, 7 and 12, if I did plus 7 plus 12, because C was positive and B was positive, I'm going to get to my 19. Now, here's where kind of students get hung up. I'm just going to rewrite 19 as 7x plus 12x. I have not changed the value of 19. I just split it up into two pieces, 7x and 12x, and then I'm going to carry everything else down, 4x squared and the 21. Now from here, it just turns into factor by grouping. Certainly there are multiple ways to factor these. If you have a different method and it works, I'm fine with that. This is just the one that I use in class because it's consistent with the tutoring center. So now I'm going to group up the first two, and if you're struggling with factor by grouping, go back to the 6.1 video. Well, 4x squared and 7x, I'm looking for what's the greatest thing that they have in common. Just an x, and I'm left with 4x plus 7. Carry down my sign. 12 and 21 have a 3 in common, and then I'm left with 4x plus 7. I have done factor by grouping right if the parentheses match. So then I'm going to write down what's being repeated. 4x plus 7. And then when I take that out, I'm going to write down the leftover, x plus 3. And that is going to be my final answer. Now again, order doesn't matter, so you could have these two things flipped and it would still be correct. All right, let's try another one. Completely factor. 15x squared minus 7x minus 2. So don't see that they have anything in common. I'm going to go straight to multiplying because I've got this number in front, 15. So 15 times 2 times negative 2, but 15 times 2 is going to give me 30. Now I'm looking for two numbers, so let's check my signs. Because this number is negative, C is negative, I'm going to have one positive, one negative. So I'm looking for two that will actually subtract to 7. And you'll see I've got 3 and 10. So I'm going to rewrite negative 7x as negative 10x, because the bigger number has to match the middle term, plus 3x. So I didn't change anything, I just rewrote negative 7 as negative 10x plus 3x, which is really still the same thing. So then I'm going to carry the rest of this stuff down, and then it just turns into factor by grouping. So I'm going to group up the first two, group up the second two. 15x squared minus 10x, they have a 5x in common, and then I'm left with 3x minus 2. Carry down my sign. 3x minus 2 has nothing in common, so I can write that as a 1, and then dividing out a 1 really doesn't change the value. Write down what's being repeated. 3x minus 2. And then write down the leftovers. 5x plus 1. And that would be your final answer. Remember that you can check all of these by FOIL. And if you're unfamiliar with FOIL, go back to chapter 5. That was multiplying polynomials. All right, last example, example 4. I wanted to make sure I did one in the video because this one, if you don't catch the GCF, you'll get the whole thing wrong. So I've been talking about checking the GCF. Well, this one actually has a greatest common factor. Has a 2 in common. So I'm going to take a 2 out of every single term. So dividing out a GCF just means divide out. 10x squared divided by 2 is going to give me 5x squared. Negative 6x divided by 2 is going to give me negative 3x. Negative 16 divided by 2 is going to give me negative 8. If you don't catch the GCF, you're going to get some really big numbers when you go to do that multiply a times c, or that rainbow part. So now that I've factored out the GCF, I'm going to multiply 5 times 8, and I already got my 40 over here. There are the factors of 40. Now here I've got c of negative, so I'm having one positive, one negative. So I'm looking for two numbers that will subtract to -3. So once you've factored out the GCF, you are only worried about the inside part. I no longer care about that A, B, and C, just the one after it's been factored out. So I'm looking for two numbers that will get me to -3, well, 5 and 8. And I'm going to have one positive, one negative. If you remember our little trick that we wrote down from the sign chart, bigger number is going to match the sign, so -8x plus 5x. So I just rewrote -3 as -8x plus 5x. Carry everything else down. Now I'm just going to ignore the GCF until the very end, and then I'm going to drop it down out front. So we're not forgetting about it. I'm just going to not keep writing it over and over again. All right, so I'm going to do factor by grouping, group up the first two, group up the second two. Well, 5x squared minus 8x, the only thing those have in common is an x. So I'll be left with 5x minus 8. Carry down my sign. 5x minus 8 have a 1 in common, which really means nothing. So I'm still left with 5x minus 8. Write down what's being repeated, 5x minus 8, and then write down what's being left over, which would be that part, x plus 1. Now, a lot of students will just leave that. Don't forget about our GCF. We've got to carry that 2 down out front. So that whole thing would then be your answer. So the only difference is with a GCF that you then just write the GCF in front of the factors. That's the only real difference.